was the major constraint. And today it still remains the Achilles heel of that sector. Now, during this time, I've attended about well over 30 events addressing the issue of financing, and none have had a real positive impact on increasing access to financing. The general consensus is that commercial financing is not the answer. And the alternative sources of financing, we have heard today capital markets, we have heard about venture capital. What I think we have to ask ourselves is whether those alternative sources of financing really meets the needs of the SME sector. Now, in the CARICRIS presentation, we heard of a survey, I believe, if I'm correct, 11.4 million, 44 employees. That is not the average SME in CARICOM. And the region has to look deep as to what are the alternatives that are best suited for the sector, recognizing that we may have to segment the sector further. What is best for micro? What is best for small? What is best for medium? What is the best practice in terms of alternative financing? Is it the government that takes the lead? Governments in our region is strapped for cash. How then do we find a solution? Thank you.
The question is whether we focus development on single entrepreneurs and minority, or whether we entrain our full society in that business, the business of creating livelihoods. Barbados strikes me as very much having a society that deserves that kind of structure. And when I look at Trinidad, I don't have the figures for Barbados. We import $4 billion worth of food. We also import $61 billion worth of goods, making a total of $65 billion a year. At the same time, the entire Caribbean area imports $3.5 billion US worth of food a year. Now, are these not markets? And can we not try to capture them? And can we not try to entrain much more of the people we live with? We are literate. In the case of Barbados, I admire Bajan's civility and their willingness to seize upon opportunities. And Barbados has structured a decent society. It has a university. I would like to see lower down below centers for developing technology that will increase capability. And inside that capability, the way it should be done is not to narrowly constrain learning, but to allow free range to ideas, because we live on ideas. And the way in which we in the Caribbean kill ideas and kill initiative, particularly by, by our lovely public servants. They do not understand that our young men and our women will dream dreams. And we are such stuff as dreams are made on. And our little life is rounded with sleep. But while we wake and dream, let it not be a nightmare. We have created a kind of nightmare in Trinidad, and we are building superstructures of elegant kinds, financial and otherwise, on quicksand. This is a society very much at risk.
I totally agree with Catherine in terms of really moving the sector towards being more open, more transparent, being willing to provide information. And they have to see that that is the only sustainable way towards growing and being able to access more funding, new funding to be able to grow the business. I mean, we have a very heavy bank-centric sort of relationship that's happening right now. The SMEs are paying through their nose for that, right? But they seem to be comfortable with that. And the challenge is really how do we move them beyond that? The banks, of course, have their role to play, but SMEs can access funding at much lower rates, much more suitable structures for their particular businesses, if only they would also be willing to be more transparent, provide the information that's needed in a timely manner, look at genuine ways of improving their businesses. Thanks.
I'd like to just add one point in terms of why is it that over 10 years or 20 years that you spoke about, that SMEs are not getting the funding that is needed. And as we saw from the model and the research, there is enough funds available. And one aspect that I have observed in my own personal experience is entrepreneurs think that having an idea is all that it takes to be successful. And as we heard from Mr. Springer, the idea is only a seed, as Newton once said, it is 1% inspiration, 99% is perspiration. And many entrepreneurs do not translate the idea or do not have the wherewithal to translate that idea into a business model and be able to put in place the necessary systems and procedures and people and all that is necessary to convert that idea into a real tangible business that creates profits. Because nothing will give happiness to a banker than to find an entrepreneur who can actually take the money and be able to convert it into real profits and pay back the loan. And so we have a problem on both sides. Funding is available, but the other side, the takers of the funding do not have the ability to convert that into real profitable productivity. And that is where probably a lot of investment need to be done in terms of creating the management capability that is needed to convert an entrepreneur to be a manager. And that is a huge gap that I feel exists in the Caribbean across the wide.
Thank you very much. I'd like to focus on just two of the questions. The first one related to access to money and what government's role should be. It came out in the clinic number 1 yesterday afternoon, or was it morning, where we are saying that government has a responsibility to provide incentives to the private sector where the money lies. Ram just said again, there's plenty of money in the private sector, but the private sector sees it as a risk to invest it directly into these enterprises. So government has a responsibility to be creative, in terms of the incentive to allow that money to move usefully into the enterprises. In fact, about 3 years ago, late Prime Minister David Thompson actually launched the Barbados Entrepreneurial Venture Capital Fund, and he promised the private sector an incentive. Now, we had gone to the private sector who said that as soon as that incentive is in place, that is CBET Inc., as soon as the incentive is in place, we will write our checks, right? And that was an incentive which would guarantee the investment, the capital investment, for a period of 10 years. In other words, if the venture capital company failed, government would make sure that the private sector company got their money back. If the venture capital succeeded, then the private sector would get a return on the investment through the venture capital company. So I feel strongly about that, that the government has that responsibility to provide some innovative, some creative incentive to the private sector to get that money moving, to mobilize that money from just sitting down there sometimes, earning no interest at all, and the country is suffering. Good. The second point relates to the food import bill. Thanks for referring me to as Mr. Barbados. I didn't think I had a physique for it, but I'll accept it anyhow. The Barbados has a $600 million food import bill, and over the last 3 years, they've begun to address it, not only focusing on exports to earn foreign exchange, but how can we displace imports to save foreign exchange.
With respect to the issue of financing SMEs, and somebody made a point that we've been doing the same thing for years and talking about the same issues for the last 10 years. And let me say Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean is not unique in that regard. I mean, I sat at a conference in Johannesburg not too long ago, and I'm saying, yes, all over the world, they seem to be raising the same issues over and over again. When are we going to get solutions? If we come up with a model like the VC model in the context of Trinidad and Tobago, yes, we had a venture capital initiative. Yes, there was an incentive, I think it was a 35% tax credit for persons investing in the fund. But the use of the fiscal incentive was not effective because what that did was yet mobilize money into a venture capital fund, but did not ensure that the money flowed to respective businesses. So it's how you use the incentive, and perhaps we need to come up with some innovative ways in the use of fiscal incentives. So it's not just about venture capital not being effective, but perhaps the model used. I want to refer to the SMEIS model in Nigeria, where there was a penalty if the fund did not flow to the respective SME. So that's something we have to look at. I mentioned as well crowdsourcing, which is relatively new, and which in the US has been quite effective in mobilizing capital. And that is something we may want to look at as we seek to develop or upcoming entrepreneurs. Somebody made a point about our society, and we really need to take a look at the kind of society we're creating, because we seem to be talking about developing business as though it is in isolation of what happened in the wider environment. Its use of governance. Its use of governance is not just at the level of the firm, it's within the wider society. And it starts all areas. And if we don't address it, in all corners, then really, we come and be talking about this next 5, 10 years. So we have to look at the total system. Raising money again, social entrepreneurs. We have people with resources, but they're not willing to commit to address some of the social issues. You see a lot of that in the more developed world. So I'm saying we really need to take a look at ourselves and the kind of society as we attempt to address these issues.